Hey folks, it's Sam, and I'm doing the 2022 and the post-COVID world update here, the good and the bad. As you can see, starting off this with the screen that says, to all those who weren't fooled by propaganda this year, I salute you. A little bit of a joke and not. But, I'm going to be talking about the good and the bad of what we may be seeing ahead. And there's definitely some good. You see, I have some stuff written down here. We've got some good stuff, some bad stuff. We all focus a lot on the bad stuff, but there's also been a lot of good of what's happened. And I'm going to literally be focusing on the good and the benefit that has come from literally like the COVID era. And as I'm going to get into it here as I start explaining and talking about this, but when it first happened in early 2020, I predicted that it was going to last through 2022 and into 2023. And the reason is because of the transit of Saturn. Once it started, this was a very Capricorn and especially a Saturn moving through Capricorn cycle. That's what I saw this as being, with lockdowns, control, all of that kind of stuff, an impact on money. I'm going to unpack all of this in this video, but I said the prediction then, and I also talked about a lot of the benefits that I saw that we were going to see culturally. You can go back and watch those videos. I don't feel like finding excerpts from it, but I said then, people who've watched my updates for years know that I talked about a few things that were going to be real advantages or real benefits once it started. And so I'm going to just go back and review those things and then also talk about some other stuff and whatnot. So that's, that's where we're at. Now, I also wanted to make sure that people understand that the 2022 forecasts are here. You can get your forecasts. They're all being delivered. They're all finished and they're being sent out in real time. You can go right now to this place and get your 2022 Vedic astrology forecast for your rising sign. That's your sidereal rising sign, right? I spelled astrology wrong, as always. Got to have a typo. But you can go there and get your Vedic astrology forecast for your sign. And again, it's only $19.97, $20. They're each about 15 minutes long. And what I do is I go over the 10 most important shifts from the 2022 Vedic astrology. Oops, where is it? From the 2022 Vedic astrology. It's not coming up. Sam, what's going on here? So anyway, from the 2022 Vedic astrology forecast that I usually bring up here, 2022 vedicastrology.com should be my website here. There it is. Yeah. I don't know why it's not coming up. Yeah. So these 10 important shifts here, which are all very important, of course, starting with Venus direct in Sagittarius in early January, then the nodes change signs, Jupiter in Pisces. We have these eclipses. I'm going to talk about each of these 10 things, but for your sign, right? But for your individual sign. So with these forecast stars, I take these 10 shifts here and talk about them for each ascendant, right? And so again, so throughout the year, you can check in April, in July, as Mars Rahu come together, the cosmic blowups in war. You want to know how that affects you as a Virgo, right? It's going to affect you differently than it's affecting a Scorpio, where it's happening in the 6th house, or the, Venus changing directions, Venus moving direct in Sagittarius, January 29th. It's going to be different if you're a Leo, where it's happening in your 5th house, than if you're a Scorpio, where it's happening in your 2nd house. So again, these forecasts, only $20, stay up to date all year. And most people, frankly, get all 12. You can get all 12 because you have people in your life that are, different signs. You can, much more easily understand them and what they're going through. Also, if you get their forecast, and you can give, you can stay up to date, and also for students to hear me explain all of these different indicators from 12 different signs. It's a great way to also learn how to do forecasts and things like that. So please avail yourself of that. You see the URL, your2020vedicastrology.com. You can just go there as well. So again, to all those who weren't fooled by the propaganda this year, I salute you. That's a big part of the negative qualities that we have right now. As you can see, the bad, a big part of it is the rise of extremism, polarizing, fact-free conspiratorial thinking. But we're going to get to that in a minute. But so I do commend people who have really tried to see beyond the polarization. And what really happened is, and again, I talked about this in great detail when we had Rahu going through Gemini. Rahu is now in Taurus. It's been in Taurus since September of 2020. But the entire time when Rahu was going through Gemini, which was the year and a half before that, right? See, I'm paying attention. I'm staying up on this stuff. I'm always paying attention to what's been going on here. I'm not just talking about right now. I go back to when the previous year and a half before this last year, when Rahu went through Gemini, it really started an acceleration of so much of the conspiracies, so much of the conspiracy theories. That's really when QAnon took off. That's when the QAnon conspiracy really went crazy, is when Rahu went through Gemini. And it really started sending things haywire as far as like nobody knows what to think anymore. Of course, this coincided with the previous president, who himself was just so constantly full of misinformation and propaganda and saying things that were clearly not true because it helped him politically or whatever it might be. All of this stuff around the, Russia and all of that stuff from a couple years ago, we started to see so much. This is when the propaganda and the misinformation just went really crazy. Then Rahu entered Taurus in the end of 2020, in September of 2020, and it kind of solidified at least a lot of that it sort of brought a lot of that into the culture, almost made it like a kind of structure, because that's what Taurus is. But it also showed where a lot of people also woke up from quite a bit of that, especially like the extremist cult like aspects and the sort of cultish negativities of the propaganda, and particularly of things like the QAnon and other conspiracies like that. However, to some extent, that opening Pandora's box sort of in that way has, and the general backdrop of this age of information, or this age of misinformation and disinformation, has also led to, again, some of the biggest problems that we have right now, especially going forward. The other thing that we can also understand, though, with this Rahu in Taurus, as Rahu has been in Taurus, again, since September of 2020, is we've also gotten a lot more good information even about how this propaganda and this and these conspiracies are also part of like psyops, psychological operations. We absolutely know that, especially here in the US, not just in the US, but in other countries and in other parts of the world as well, that algorithms, AI, which is artificial intelligence, and algorithms and social media is engineered to spread this kind of propaganda and misinformation, because it plays right into their business model. We've had a lot of good information come out, which should make everybody suspicious. People who are buying into one version of some sort of propaganda or another, especially if it's right or left leaning. Right now, even what we call mainstream media, there are two wings of mainstream media, a right wing and a left wing. And most of it, all of it is corporatized first, but then a lot of right wing mainstream media programming is to tell you that everything else is left wing or is mainstream, but we're not. We're the real thing, and everything else is just mainstream media. But that's right wing media, brainwashing or spin. So there's so much of it now. And so much of the messaging is just there's so much of this now that's going on. And since Rahu went into Taurus, again, I'm going to get into this a little more later, but just kind of opening up the field with especially how the nodes have moved. And here in 2023, the nodes are going to move. 2022, Rahu is going to move into Aries, which is going to make for things to be even more explosive. So as it's gone through Gemini, which really started a lot of the conspiratorial thinking blowing up, and then as it goes into Rahu, it's really embedded a lot of it. However, it's also been a time when we've been able to see, especially some of these documentaries, again, on the social media. We had the one whistleblower from Facebook come out and say, hey, these algorithms are engineered to outrage you and to polarize discussions. This is like almost like a doomsday machine that we're looking at. And a lot of people are waking up from their own propaganda trance and realizing, wait a minute, that all, there's right and left wing media spin. There's, even something like woke culture or cancel culture. See, these are actually memes from the right wing. These are right wing memes, but they're just as prevalent on the right wing. For example, right wing wokeness. Woke culture on the right is just as bad as woke culture on the left. Woke culture on the left might be around race or things like that, or what you might call critical race theory and all this. But on the right, it's being woke to things like, oh, you believe the science? Oh, you believe the lefties? You believe Biden? Or I don't know, whatever it might be. That's right-wing wokeism. Cancel culture, same kind of thing. Again, so all of these memes that have now penetrated and landed in our society are all what I put under the context of propaganda. And again, especially, and this is a thing that might bug some people, is especially this idea that only, like, for example, mainstream media is all left wing. Like CNN is mainstream media. No, CNN is left leaning centrist, but Fox News is also mainstream media. Newsmax, OAN, Joe Rogan, it's all mainstream now. All of it's mainstream media. Even the idea of mainstream media is in itself now this meme that is just a form of propaganda. Again, you're watching me, I could be considered mainstream media because you see me on your device. It's easier to watch me than it is to watch TV probably. So everything is ubiquitous at this point. So the reason I'm saying this now, I'm just kind of opening things up sort of culturally, because this is a lot of what we're dealing with now in the world, particularly as we get into the sort of difficult and negative possibilities ahead. And so it's also why I started off with this. The person with real discrimination now is going to be the person who sees beyond even their own instinct to be programmed and their own instinct to react to some kind of outrage. Again, so much of it now revolves around, CoVid and vaccinations. And, again, very typical memes are put forth like, oh, kids, vaccine the kids, or doing this, and some way to try to get people, incited about it. And again, we can all say that no one wants vaccinations. No one wants mandates. No one wants kids harmed. No one wants any of these things, right? But these are subtle issues. And so to think, especially those who have landed so far and hard on one end or the other, again, it's both, that there isn't something to be discussed here, or that there isn't nuance. You're not looking into your own programming, your own potential brainwashing, then you're also probably buying into what I consider to be a big psyop. Psyop is like psychological operation. And what that means is that we already know, for example, that other countries like Russia and China and maybe Iran or Iraq or other countries, not Iraq, but Iran or other enemies, let's say, of the U.S., have engaged in psyops like this, where they just want to confuse the country, confuse the world, confuse people about democracy. Because a free society who can debate ideas, well, okay, let's just confuse the hell out of everybody. And while that's happening, it gives rise to the potential for authoritarianism. What are all the things we're not talking about while we're arguing about whether or not masks, whether we should wear a mask and whether COVID is a hoax? While we're doing all of that, what aren't we looking at? Again, so we all kind of see so many people now engaged in this kind of blindness because we're chasing the latest AI social media engineered outrage, not just social media, but also in legacy media. And so again, things like, like the environment, or like in the US, we hardly have any rights. We don't have healthcare. We don't have all these other things. We don't have $15 minimum wage, all this other stuff that was before our Congress that so many people who are woke on the left and the right don't even think about while they're arguing about masks, or whether, again, COVID is a hoax, or, let's go Brandon, or some other kind of weird thing that just is nothing but keeping 95% of us distracted so the 5% or 1% can really just loot the store. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm saying when I'm talking about the if you're not fooled by all of this and not reacting to all of this, I salute you. So again, as we move forward this year, I also just wanted to, kind of foreshadow a little bit, because in the 2022 forecast, I do talk about some of these things that are coming. Jupiter is moving into Pisces, where it says mystical teachings and connections for all 12 signs. That's going to be a big shift. Also, the nodes are changing signs. These are the big shifts that are happening, moving into that Aries-Libra axis. And we also have this Mars-Rahu getting very close to each other, this sort of cosmic blow-ups and war. Could be some pretty intense possibilities in 2022 as these planets move, and Jupiter moves up here, and Rahu moves back here, and Ketu moves here. So they move into this axis, and then Mars goes around and winds up joining Rahu up here in the middle of the summer. So there's a lot of big shifts happening with 2022 socially that really portends where some of this lack of paying attention to what's really going on as we battle over something that, frankly, COVID is going to disappear off the map. I think, again, my prediction is it'll be lingering through next year. But I think by the end of the year, at least as a major force, cultural force, it's going to start to wane. If I didn't say it at the beginning, let me just read through this statement that I have here. I put this together so I could have my thoughts be pretty coherent. Hang on a second. As it says here, at the beginning of 2020, when COVID started, I said we would be dealing with it actively through 2022 and would be clear of this particular thing until 2023. So that through 2022 into 23 is how long we'd be dealing with COVID. I had hoped that as the summer ended this last summer and the Delta variant seemed to be the last major hurdle, that I would be wrong. So I was hoping, even a few months ago, we're like, okay, Delta, we're going to get that under control. And so maybe we're going to kind of move past it. But alas, with Omicron, we see another resurgence, a new wave emerging, but also we will see the end. This is probably going to be that ultimate end somehow. I predicted in the Eclipse Scorpio video that Omicron was not going to be as bad as we think, even though it may be very intense for a while. That seems to be playing out. Where we're standing now, that seems to be correct. This is looking to be the case, as it seems to be very contagious, but not as lethal. This is exactly the thing we would hope for and expect as viruses mutate. They seem to get less lethal and more transmissible usually. So this is a predictable course, how most pandemics and viruses peter out. At least this is my understanding. I'm not an expert in this, and I freely admit it. I've done my research. I've done some research, though, and usually what happens is as they mutate, they seem to get a little more contagious because that's what the mutations do. They wind up finding holes in the immune system, but then the trade-off for more contagiousness is less lethality. So the Delta was a major one that was also quite contagious but less lethal, and then Omicron seems to be even more so, where it's a lot more contagious but a lot less lethal. That seems to be the case. And that's the kind of thing that can also lead to, as more people get it, of course, we get that sort of herd immunity benefit as well. So this tends to be the kind of thing I understand that often leads to the end of pandemics and brings them more into the realm of an endemic. And so, again, as I had said at the beginning of COVID, when it started, I'll just go back. When it started in January, February of 2020, Saturn was right here, right at the very beginning of Capricorn. And I could see it then lining up that this was going to be something that's going to shift a lot of different things. And it was going to be a couple years. We're going to be in it for a couple years off and on. And even if there's not rampant lockdowns like it was when it first started and the whole world was locked down, it was going to be a dominant theme and issue as long as Saturn was moving through Capricorn. That was the general prediction. Now, again, within that, we had Jupiter came and joined and was back and forth. And then Jupiter went into Aquarius. And then Jupiter poked his head back into Capricorn this past year. And then in November, when Jupiter moved out, that was the event where I had hoped, this was before Omicron happened, and Jupiter moved out of Aquarius. It coincided like right as Delta was kind of like, we were coming into the winter time, but it was kind of like, it seemed like we were not going to get back into, like if we didn't have Omicron now and we were just dealing with that Delta variant, it would have been very manageable through the winter and whatnot. We had kind of managed that part. And I had hoped that maybe that was going to show, again, when Jupiter finally got out and went into Aquarius, that, okay, maybe the last part of it wasn't going to happen. But the astrology is what it is. Saturn is still there in Capricorn and has that one more surprise for us. So the initial prediction that I made I think is going to come true in that regard. Whereas I'm not saying that I think we're going to be dealing with it intensely all of next year, but at least I think this Omicron variant is going to be with us for a while. And then even one of the shifts here that happens in 2022 is Saturn moving into Aquarius from April 28th until July 12th. Now, again, Saturn's going to move out of Aquarius. He's going to move out of Aquarius April 28th till July 12th. So from April till July, I think this is a time when you're actually even going to see the Omicron kind of go away. Or like where we're, again, it's going to be in the spring. And just like this past year, when Jupiter went into Aquarius in the spring, it was very much like a resurgence. That's one of the things I said in the 2021 forecast, that, 2021 isn't going to be as bad as 2020. We're not going to be locked in our house the whole time and all that. And this fear gripping us all, especially when Jupiter goes into Aquarius. And that's really what happened, especially from the spring till much of the summer, close to the end of the summer. It definitely felt like, okay, we're living our normal life again. So Saturn poking out of Capricorn in 2022 and going into Aquarius is going to be like a bit of a relief, I think. Then he's going to go back in at the end of July, and we may see another resurgence of something, maybe not COVID, but especially some kind of financial, economic, social pressure that's maybe related or a kind of residual to, the same kind of theme, perhaps. Again, I'll look into all that more later. But so that's a kind of overview. And especially with Rahu moving into Aries and Ketu moving into Libra, and then Mars joining, there's quite a lot of explosive potential in 2022. Again, this is one of the things I wanted to talk about, again in this video, is really the kind of a kind of overview of 2022 and a kind of cultural, historical context with the things that have been happening in the last couple years, and especially with the culture and where we've been with Saturn. And we've been really in the sort of COVID era the last couple years, and seeing, again, part of this video is also to show that I see the end. I did see it in this way even a couple of years ago, that we would still be dealing with it through much of 2022. Doesn't mean the entire time. It also means that by the time Saturn completely finishes, it's going to feel like that part is done. At least this part, what we're in right now, with all of this pressure and conspiracy. I have to stop. Maybe not the conspiracy, because the conspiracy could linger on, especially around the vaccine, and like, we have no idea what it's going to do. And people still believing 10 years from now that, oh, the reason you got sick 5 years after you got the vaccine is because from the vaccine, right? And this is going to linger, I think. I think that whole idea is going to linger. That because it was, as some people say, just totally experimental, and we have no idea what it's going to do. And, these ideas, people think already, you can already see it set up in many people's minds, that almost anything that people are going to get sick of in the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, might be blamed on the vaccines. And by the way, let's wait and see. Maybe there are things that we don't know. And by the way, I'm not saying that's impossible, but I also can see that whether that happens or not, and we could see some unexpected, unexplained, results from the vaccines, at least, one version or something like that. Some of these things could be around the corner. Okay. But whether they are or not, and my feeling is it's probably not going to be the case. And I say this mainly because of the powerful Saturn in Capricorn, where he's holding it down. Like, he's been in that sign, which is holding down that solution and that cure, I guess you would say. And then he's going into Aquarius again, which is also the sign that he rules. And by the way, during that whole time as well, the first part, Rahu was in Gemini, and Rahu was also in Taurus. Again, these are powerful signs for both ends of the node as well. So my feeling is that we're not going to see these paranoid scenarios of people having these, these unexpected illnesses that were caused by the vaccine. But it's very possible that the theory or the paranoia or the rhetoric and the idea of that happening will go on for years. Particularly, I would say, from the, I don't want to use politics, but the left-wing side of it, the holistic health people, and the ones who have done their research and realized that it's rewriting DNA and all of that stuff. And that wing could very well just be looking for confirmation bias around those things for years, because they've already set that up. And especially, again, this is the way paranoia works, is that, well, we have no idea. We have no idea what could happen. No idea. Again, or again, when you say something that open-ended, especially in relationship to something that measurable, there's no competition, because it's like, show me the proof of these things being measured, right? And then you point to things that aren't measured or aren't measurable, or saying, well, they're not reporting it, or they're underreporting it, or just vague statements of things that they're doing. Again, this is how it works. Something entirely measurable in comparison to something that you could never measure. And then, rather than, quote, trusting or believing the thing that's being measured, you trust or believe the thing that you could never measure. So this is why it's very hard to say anything back in that way, except, well, you just believe this. So we could see that kind of thing linger, but but as far as the actual issue that we're dealing with of masks, distancing, more variants, and all of that kind of stuff, I think that through 2022, and probably even from the middle of 2022, we should hopefully see it finish. As far as after that, it's going to be manageable, and by the time Saturn moves into Aquarius, we're moving on to something different, right? And so so I want to talk about some of this, as I call it, the good and the bad. It's a good comment here. Marsha Kollick has said it's more likely lingering health issues will be related to long COVID versus vaccine issues. This is absolutely right. And again, this is exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about, is when we get into things like the propaganda, it's like we act like there's absolutely no consequences for not getting a vaccine. And with those who just want to focus on that part, like if it's a vaccine kind of thing, it's like they just want to focus on these abstract, bewildering numbers that could happen, instead of what about the consequences of not getting it, of not getting the vaccine? There's consequences there too. There might be some danger in getting it, but there's always danger. There's danger in not getting it. There's danger in getting it and recovering and having long-term health. So that's a great point, Marcia. Thanks for bringing that up. So that's more likely to be the real scenario. But again, I'm also saying that we live in this age of propaganda, which is one of the bad things I'm going to get to down here. As far as the future is concerned, I have a feeling that's going to linger on for a long time. We can see it. It's already a setup. So by the way, this, one of the reasons I also wanted to do this is because at the time that the COVID happened in early 2022, I made predictions then that I said, here's what's going to be the benefit of this COVID. Yeah, it looks terrible now. It looks awful. We're going to be locked down for a while, but this is a powerful transit of Saturn through Capricorn. It's clearing away a lot of stuff. It's destroying a lot of stuff. It's bringing the truth of time and the pressure of time to bear on a lot of things that are unsustainable, where we're not living in accordance with the environment, with nature, with all of these things. And that's really where it came from, because it's this virus that jumped out of bats into people. And again, are screwing around with the environment or with animals in wet markets and all kinds of stuff, whether it came literally from the wet market or whatever. We're still doing all of this stuff, all the mindless consumerism of veggie and all of non-veg, and of the abuse of animals and factory farming, not to mention all the problems. We're still going to these jobs where there's no reason to be doing that we're going to gain and benefit a lot. On the other side of COVID, we're going to benefit a lot. But right now we have to deal with all this stuff. So let's deal with it. And there's going to be a lot of benefits here, because it's still the old paradigm getting shaken out. So let me go over what those things were. And I said it back then, and I'll repeat it now. In the good side, and again, I'm talking about the kind of post-COVID world now. I'm looking forward. The good thing is the food, non-meat issue. And I put this here. Again, these are just kind of bullet points for me to remember. But that means things like the rise of veggie meat alternatives and Beyond Meat and all of that kind of mock meats and all of that stuff, where people realize the unsustainability and the lack of health that comes from consuming animals, and all of this has exponentially exploded. Again, I said this at the time, that it was going to really explode, but I had no idea it would be as much as it is. These companies now, these are some of the best, some of the best investments you can have right now, as far as commodities or whatever you would call that class of investment. So many kinds of meat alternatives now, because people are looking for healthier options rather than factory farmed animals. And again, this didn't come, COVID didn't come from factory farming, but it's the same blight and destruction of the environment and our abuse of animals and nature. So this is definitely something that is a great benefit, and it's just going to exponentially increase. And so the next is labor organizing, workforce quitting. So one of the things that also happened is we've seen a lot of, especially recently, a lot of labor in response to the way companies have dealt with not just with COVID, but with the break in the work in the work stoppages and other kinds of things that have happened. It's really awakened. It's not really COVID related, but an outcry or an outpouring or an outgrowth of the disruption is that you had a lot of these companies have sorry, one second. A lot of these companies have really shifted or have really revealed themselves as being so predatory and exploitive, and the workers, walking out and whatnot. So I think there was a cereal company. I don't remember the names of them all, but there's been so many. John Deere factory and whatnot, Amazon. So a lot of labor organizing and a lot of the workforce even quitting. And trying it at the very least, trying to set off on a new course. And a lot of that new course has to do with things like reclaiming our time with online remote work and learning. One of the biggest things I knew was going to be a benefit, and I saw a lot of my students and friends really benefit from this, is like, hey, folks, guess what? You have this thing called the internet. You can reach people all over the world. It's been great for counselors, astrologers, people that want to, healers. Again, a lot of my students and, astrologers, students really have taken their business to the next level because, again, they were still very much in the mindset of, well, trying to get people in person. And I really like in person. Yeah, we all like in person, but it doesn't make sense to not use these tools. So it's been great, again, not just for healers and counselors, but even things like, I said it at the time, these big tech companies, Google, Facebook, all of these big companies that just pay people to go drive their car, to sit in a building in front of a computer when there's no reason to do all of that. Most of these companies were able to completely change their work model with no problem at all because there was no reason for people to be doing that anyway. By the way, I'm someone who lived in San Francisco for 20 years, and I saw that traffic jam every day from people driving from San Francisco to San Jose or wherever the heck it was, or people driving into the city where you could never drive because of all these people driving to these tech jobs. You could just work from home. So again, this falls into the reclaiming our time with online remote work and also learning, remote education. Again, this also means that all of these universities and whatnot, they've taken a hit, and this has been nothing but a gigantic glut of money and time and space, particularly these, Yale or something that charges like $50,000 tuition, and you could just do it online. I mean, how this is going to completely, even that traditional education system, not to mention the value that you get from it, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but even just shifting the paradigm. We're not going back. We're not going back to that old model of having to go and do everything in person. Some of it will. The education, probably more of that will return, but the jobs, definitely not. It's going to now be standard and mandatory and understood that you're not going to get people to just come and drive and sit in a cubicle unless you need to do it. You could still maybe have people come in once every 2 weeks or whatever it might be to have meetings, but if jobs can be done remotely, they're done remotely now, and it's a great savings of resources and all other kinds of stuff. Again, that also includes learning and education, but also reimagining our future beyond the corporate job and corporate education. These are kind of related, but I put the reimagining part because, again, especially with the online education and also corporate jobs, because, again, a lot of people that were in the corporate jobs who had this kind of secret fantasy of being like a healer or a counselor or this or that, they got all this time to do it. And they got to sit there and they could even do their job. Let's say their job as a programmer at Google. They could sit there and do their job as a programmer at Google without having to spend 3 hours commute every day. And then also take the same platform, Zoom and start doing counseling, like reclaiming our job and our time and reimagining our future beyond being these drones. Again, as someone who, I'm on the front line of all this stuff because, I think last couple of years I've done my typical 250 readings a year or something. I do so many readings, and this is how much of this do you think I talk to people about? Since COVID, I haven't had to go to a job, but I want to do this, and this is the stuff I talk to people about all the time. So this is what I do, and I hear it all the time and see people now doing this. And the big shift is reimagining the future as people reclaim their time from the corporate overlords, literally. But also these new educational systems are breaking down. People realize, what is the point of this, Stanford degree? I got a degree from Stanford in something, and it cost me, $50,000 a year. And, I get out of school, and what the heck am I going to do with this? Go use it, trade that in for some job in a building somewhere? People realizing and learning how to connect more with their passion. And again, not just as teachers and healers and counselors, but a lot of other things, like things that you can do more remotely, or to be able to pursue their passions in other ways, and reimagining the value of education and alternate education. And by the way, that even includes things like, again, for example, why go to a place, I'm just going to use this as an example, but why go to a place like, I'll just say Stanford, but any major university and get like a marketing degree? I couldn't imagine something more worthless, frankly, than a marketing or an MBA from one of these universities now. Because business now, if you want to learn marketing, get an online course from a marketer who if you want to really learn marketing, learn it from someone who has done it, not some teacher in a university, for example. Again, if you're doing that, I'm not trying to insult you, but all I'm saying is, like, if I want to learn marketing, I'm not going to go to Stanford. I'm going to learn it from Frank Kern or Eben Pagan or Jeff Walker, or someone who is just who that's what they're self-made and they've done it, and they have online courses that are very easy, that are very streamlined. Again, this is just an example, and the point is alternatives to the standard model of go to high school, get out, go to some college, spend all this money for a degree in some kind of thing, and then what? And then you're thrust into a society where we don't even have a minimum wage, or, whatever it might be. You wind up working these jobs where you're unfulfilled. So this has been a pattern interrupt. Again, this is what I said back at the beginning, that it was going to be a huge pattern interrupt that was going to give us all a lot of time to evaluate these things and question what we're doing and why we're doing it. Now, again, some people, it doesn't mean that that if people don't want to do that they're somehow not getting it. That's not the point. The point is that for those who are looking for something different, or as a way to have disrupted and shaken the world in a way that could be very positive, that can be positive and will be positive, this is something that could be quite beneficial. And I think it's going to eventually also lead to higher wages and more appreciation from the workforce, from these employers as well. One second. Eventually that's going to happen as well. So these are some things that I think are very, very beneficial from the whole disruption. A few other things that I thought about. I forgot here. This new approach to holistic health, psychedelic medicine, veganism, etc. Again, this has been a great benefit because it's really opened a lot of people up to the alternative healing, holistic health, again, psychedelic medicine, veganism or vegetarianism, or at least not just mindlessly consuming a big piece of meat every day, and making people introspect more about our health choices and whatnot. So these are already paying dividends for a lot of people, and will continue to do so. And something else I didn't put, but it could also be implicit in all of this, but I'll say it explicitly, is many people that I've talked to with all this time on their hands, it's been great for actually introspection and meditation and spiritual practice and authentic, cultivation of silence and stillness and peace within. Many people have never had a break from the rat race, right? And so for a lot of people, it's been a time to be able to, as Gayatri says here, the pandemic pause, sit, reflect, and assess genuinely. Yeah, shaking things up. Again, it's very Saturn thing. Saturn in Capricorn. Again, remember the astrology. This isn't all, I didn't say this because I'm some psychic. I was reading astrology. Saturn in Capricorn. And then I just looked at the situation. It's like, yes, that's what it's going to do. And how is it showing up this way? Our time to concentrate, time to focus, not waste a lot of resources, waste a lot of time. Mindlessly consume, be disconnected from the earth, disconnected from the cycles and rhythms. That's all Saturn Capricorn stuff. That's why I said it. It's not because I'm just some genius, but I'm doing astrology here. That's how it works. Now, the bad stuff here, much of it is stuff that I've even kind of alluded to a little bit here, but some of this, again, some of these are much more are sort of from maybe the pandemic directly. Others are just endemic or systemic right now that we're having to deal with. And one of them is just the disconnect from nature, the over-reliance on screens, et cetera. We're just so, again, this is just a problem with the world. And again, this Saturn in Capricorn trying to destroy some of that and bring it, with that solitude, something that's more introspected and grounded and not external and hypnotic, to kind of break the trance, especially the trance of the screen, right? Of course, you're seeing me on your screen, and that's a great use of your screen. Let me hypnotize you. As long as you're watching me, that's a great use of your screen. No, but that, again, obviously that's really leading us away from something that's more grounded. Rise of extremism and the polarizing of every issue. Again, this is the main form that I've seen and that I saw really rise when Rahu went through Gemini. It's not just that we have discussions now, but everything is so polarized and extreme. Even the halls of Congress and whatnot, everybody's a terrorist or committed treason, or it's like everything is so polarized. Again, that's why I go back. Those who weren't fooled by the propaganda. Everything is propaganda and extreme, polarized to the extreme, right? We see something and, we seize upon, Fauci, the scapegoat. Oh, the one who did it all, or this one, or no, the good one, the bad one. Do you love him or hate him? Is this like no one has discrimination. Nothing is just, okay, the person said something wrong. They also said something right. They have good things, bad things. It's happened the way it's been happening for 30 years. It's just now it's this version of it. Again, there's a reason why things are so extreme and that the newly woke and triggered are acting this way. And it's because of this rise of the exploitation through AI and algorithms. We know these things are going on now. And if you cannot check yourself and realize your outrage is being engineered, right? And the selective outrage is in many ways, part of a plan to keep you engaged and to, stimulate that part of you that wants to find the villain and the it's very easy to find a scapegoat and the one to hate and the one to love. I love this one, hate this one, because it automatically cuts off your higher faculties of discrimination. It's impossible to have discrimination and just be completely 100% in absolute hatred of one side of something, especially like this. Not if it's legit, like where there's a total, obvious, someone kills a bunch of people intentionally or whatever. But again, people who think that within the context, especially of like the virus and whatnot, that all of the like nuanced, especially I have to be honest, I've never seen the kind of scapegoating and crazy projection that we see, especially leveled at Fauci, who is like, I don't love or hate any of them, but it's like he changed his mind. First he said this, then he said that, and then he said this. And yeah, because it's a changing environment. And first of all, the first part of what he was doing was Donald Trump was president, for God's sake. And he's trying to like make some sense out of what's going on. And the president, is like saying God knows what from day to day. Is it any wonder he was not consistent? But again, even aside from that, it's maddening to me as well. It's maddening. Okay, it's maddening to see it. But I'm just talking about the rise of the extremism and the polarizing, like that a fascist and a devil and the Satan, and like, man, just so much of this is engineered right now. So again, this is obviously a huge problem that we have to try to get our head around. And again, the rise of fact-free conspiratorial thinking, just so easy to turn these things into, again, where we're just it's not fact. It's just riding a bias where we like, I just, something about him I don't like. So now I'm going to him or her or this one or that one I don't like. So I'm going to just listen to the information and the social media people and the messages that confirms that, yeah, he's really the worst thing ever. And again, just go off the cliff with that and losing our way with all of this. And then underneath it all, though, I think as it says here, the rise of governmental corporate authoritarianism, this is the backdrop. This is the part that scares me the most, because I see everyone doing this whole kind of extremist, polarized, AI-fueled, conspiratorial shitstorm, excuse my language. Like day to day, everyone's adrenaline is going crazy over this. And in the background, behind the scenes, in the US especially, we could really see it. It's happening around the world in a lot of areas with the rise of governmental corporate authoritarianism. As these things are weaponized, these things meaning all of this extremist AI algorithm, fact-free stuff is weaponized, and we avoid the real issues that are poised to roll over us. In the US, that includes looming threats of voting rights decimation, outlawing women's rights, right-wing pro-biz Supreme Court, gun violence out of control. All of these real issues are obscured by arguments mainly about mass vaccines, other things. So again, that's how it looks in the US. And again, I understand too that around the world, I absolutely know and believe and feel like governments overstep. The Australian government probably went too far on lockdowns and shutdowns, and at times maybe the US did as well, out of caution or because of fear of this spread of this virus, again, which is a real thing that has overwhelmed hospitals, and all that stuff can happen for sure. All of this stuff is real. And yeah, all of it's true. All of it's possible. All of it's true. Because one is true doesn't mean the other is false or whatever. It can all be true. Governments overreact, and businesses exploit you. Governments exploit you. And public officials plugged into a corrupt system are going to be corrupt. All of it's there. It's all real. But underneath it all, there's also a priority. And again, the backdrop behind all of the like stuff that's going on, like I've never seen before, with people completely not paying attention. In the US, it's just rampant. They're literally rigging the next election and right in front of us, and one of the parties couldn't care less. The other one is doing it. We're just like, and nobody's outraged about things like that. And again, even I haven't even mentioned things here like global warming and other just other gigantic ticking bombs, nuclear weapons. None of that's going away. Again, someone says, Sandy D, you want to see it in action? Go to Colorado Fire Crisis Board. You can't even get the vital info about anti-pro vaccines around giving sleeping quarters to people. Info out for the anti-pro. Right. So you can't even talk about things like wildfires because there's so much anti-vax, like this, everybody's so fired up about this. Like it's the only thing anybody cares about. Like, why are people's heads exploding about, for example, I'm not a woman, it's never going to affect me, but women not losing the right to have autonomy over their body and the right to choose. It'll never affect me. I'm a man, but I still care about it because I care about things more than just what are going to affect me. By the way, $15 an hour minimum wage, it'll never affect me. Probably. I don't think. Paid family leave. I don't have a family. Most of the issues that I see that I care about a lot aren't probably ever going to affect me. In fact, I should probably shut up, especially considering my lifestyle, my age, and all that. They're rigging the system for me. I should shut up and enjoy it. But again, so all the stuff that's going on are just like, nobody, and people aren't looking at that. Again, because of all this other stuff here, disconnect from over-reliance on all the other stuff, etc. Is this rise of government corporate authoritarianism, right? We're not just in the U.S. I'm talking about the U.S. because I live here, but around the world, corporate fascist states, and yes, the World Health Organization and the international business cartels and what they've been together for decades. And I get people just woke up to it. Okay, I get it. Great, welcome. But and these systems have been rigged for such a long time. But we still have immediate things right in front of us now that we have to deal with, or else they're going to roll over everything else very quickly. The point is, COVID's going to be behind us here. We keep right now, we're like, no. And you see it with every month, like a couple months ago, it was the outrage about forcing healthcare workers to get vaccinated, right? A couple months ago, that was the thing that they were all fired up about. Then it's like children. Now we're fired up about that. Now it's Omicron. And now we're fired up about that. Like the next thing that we're just fired up about. And meanwhile, again, all these rights are getting taken away. And anyway, so this is the thing that is the bad part. So the good part here is there are some real signs that things are so that culturally, in a long-term sense, a paradigm shift is happening around, again, reclaiming our time, reimagining work and our autonomy, taking a lot of it back from these corporate interests, and reimagining our future, a new approach to holistic health, different kinds of, psychedelic medicine and stuff like that has also been really big. Even things like mushrooms and other ways of healing ourselves. But we still have these huge problems right now. And especially these are the ones that are so acute that I see. And again, into next year, with the nodes, with Rahu moving into Aries and Mars also joining, we're poised dangerously toward things like potentials for civil war, if not with guns, literally like with armies against each other, at least just more and more militants. And by the way, I don't think these things are impossible at all in the next few years. It could happen. And I don't mean to scare people, but I not as if you haven't thought of this before, but this is very possible. So some people have shown up late and then they're telling me, what about the COVID? I already said it. So if you're going to come late, then, I already said that my feeling is that through 2022, we're going to see the end of it by the end of 2022. That issue dominating our life so much is going to be again, waning, right? But again, there's going to be more. There will be other issues that replace it, and that perhaps generate a similar kind of outrage. And this, and again, a few other people have mentioned things like police brutality and all that. Yeah, I mean, again, I mentioned that with the rise of, in this kind of sort of hodgepodge of things like, voting rights and gun violence out of control, policing. There's so many cultural problems right now that we need to deal with. And one of the biggest is also, I think the biggest is probably the money in politics and the corporate fascism, especially in the US, because we're also unlike any other developed country. We don't have health care. We hardly have, we don't have living wage. It's really, I mean, guns everywhere. I mean, it's, and it's because of the corporate fascism that's running our government. And again, yeah, I don't like the idea. I don't like mandates with vaccines. I don't like any of this stuff either. None of us like it. But on the behind all of that is literally like ticking bombs everywhere that I see people not paying attention to. And there's probably a version of that in many other countries around the world too. But I wanted to do this update mainly because 22 is around the corner, and I wanted to let people know about some of these things that I already talked about, and it's to also double down in the positive sense also about things that I did see at the onset of COVID that were positive, and that these things are playing out, and there is reason to be reason to have hope about some of these things for sure. But right in front of our face right now, this other stuff is so urgent and dangerous as well. And hopefully messages like this can get out there, and people who are still being triggered or whatnot can step back and go, wait a minute. Yeah, you're right. I'm maybe this is a big psyop as well. Maybe it's not just that, the fake news is brainwashing me. Maybe my idea that the fake news is brainwashing me is part of other brainwashing. Why is it just a coincidence that, everyone on one side of the political aisle or whatever is telling me this too? Maybe that's also part of a way to kind of throw sand in people's eyes. So we see it from both sides. And we have to be careful because we're at a very tenuous point right now, globally and whatnot. So aside from that, I hope this was helpful. And, I try to avoid a lot of the hot button social issues these days because I know people get triggered and whatnot, but this is also the world we live in, and I do my best to try to be objective. Aside from that, you can definitely get your 2022 forecast and see me talk about these 10 shifts that you must know for 2022, but as it relates to your sign. These are available right now. When you go there, you can get it for your sign, or you can get all 12 signs and rock and roll like that. Okay. So folks, I'm glad to have you here and that you invited me into your world here on New Year's Eve. And some of you, I'll see you on class tomorrow. I have a course tomorrow on January 1st and 2nd on starting 2022 with confidence and success, and a very interesting and powerful streamlined way to read the chart that I think everybody will really like. So we'll be in touch, and you all have a great New Year's Eve.